Well, hello there, folks.
Hello.
Let me turn this shit down.
I had no idea where that was coming from.
And let me get us right.
Hey,
all right.
There we are.
What's up, Pat? How we doing? How we doing, everybody in the chat as well? We got a new streaming location, Pat. I did not tell you this because it doesn't matter, but we are on the Off the Bench YouTube live for the first time.
Off the Bench YouTube.
Yeah. Figure, mix it up a little bit, get it to where our audience actually lies, not necessarily the Twitch audience who, I know support me, but wasn't always known as Podcast Haven. So guys, let me know if the audio's good. I think it's good. I think we got this sorted out since last week. I'm not cranked up. So no ear torture this week, no ear torture last week. I think we're good. But Pat, how was your weekend, man? How are we feeling?
Oh, feeling good. I'm sure you're feeling a lot better than I'm feeling.
Yeah,
well, I don't know. Are you?
I mean, I'm feeling pretty good right now. So this is tricky, right? This is probably only for the live audience, this segment of the podcast, because I'm going to have to edit this out because it's going to be awkward if I leave it in. But depending what happens with the NBA Finals tonight, I'm going to, chop on a little soliloquy tomorrow about the Nuggets, assuming they win. We could not push the podcast to tomorrow because Pat's a busy boy. Pat's just a busy boy. So we're going to record and, talk normal NFL stuff. And then I will solo talk about the Nuggets should they close things out tonight and win an NBA championship. But yeah, Pat, I'm going to be at Game 5 for those that don't know. I can't wait. I'm bringing my fancy camera, all this stuff. I'm going to get some great stuff and probably do a little finals vlog. But look, man, it's crazy. I can't believe the Nuggets are one game away from winning an NBA title. It does not feel real at this point.
Well, and the fact that you're able to go and you're that close and it's that convenient for you, the stars have just completely aligned. That's just
incredible coincidence. I mean, first of all, the odds that I'm a Nuggets fan in Connecticut, and then the first time that I'm in Denver, I moved to Denver, complete coincidence, irrelevant to the Nuggets fandom. And the first year that I live here, they make the NBA Finals. Amazing, just incredible. So I'm a very lucky boy, but we are going to talk some football here, and I'll add the basketball stuff onto the podcast tomorrow. So for those of you that are here live and want to hear my thoughts on whether the Nuggets do or do not finish off the title, tune in when I upload that tomorrow. But Pat, we've got some football stuff. First, I want to lead off with this. We speculated on who the Colts' gambling identity was last week. We talked about Mo Alley Cox, potential Ashton duel. Pat, it's Isaiah Rodgers.
Well, we're gonna get sued. We're gonna get sued for slander on poor Mo Alley Cox. I forget who originally had the report, but what the fuck? I didn't know who Isaiah Rodgers was.
No, for him to say that the average NFL fan would know who Isaiah Rodgers was, that is
insane.
That is the stretch of all stretches. That is like PE fitness test, you're overweight, having to reach for your toes type of stretch. That is so egregious. And I know that ultimately I know that ultimately this does not matter, but I'm still gonna be mad about it. That. Screw you, dude. Don't say the average NFL fan would know who that is, because Isaiah Rodgers, there will be people that ask them in a week, they still won't know who he is. So, I mean, here's the problem, though, Pat. He may be facing an actual lifelong ban from the NFL, and that would suck. But, I mean, you look at the offense, and you're not surprised. They're taking kind of the Pete Rose method, and this guy is much less significant than Pete Rose was in baseball. So don't bet on your own team. Yeah. Don't bet on your own sport.
No, Adam Schefter said it best, and not to give him too much credit, but he did a radio hit where he's like, if you're sitting there betting on football, whether it's your team or not, you've got to know that you're doing something wrong.
Yeah.
And just the fact that, I guess it's more excusable to say that these guys place any kind of bet on team facilities, but this guy was betting on football. You've got to know you cannot do that.
Absolutely. And I do want to clean something up and specify on the Jameson Williams suspension. So we've kind of been giving Jameson Williams shit ever since that came out, and rightfully so based on the information that we had, right? We were told that he was betting on other sports, still, but inside a team facility. And that we were like, how can you, arrive on the Lions team facility, be in practice facility and pull out your phone and make a bet? Obviously practice is over, whatever, but still to be in a team facility and make a bet, how can you be that stupid? Details come out now that apparently he was in a team hotel likely during a road game and bet on a college football game. And so team hotel is being interpreted as team facility. I find that a little ridiculous. To me, I've arrived at a point where I kind of understand the discipline. I feel like 6 games may be even a little harsh given what we know now. I understand the discipline, but also that being considered a team facility feels a little strange to me. I'm exonerating Jameson Williams' stupidity. I no longer will hold that against him.
Yeah, I get why that's a team facility, but I also get why you, as a player, you may not think it is. So,
yeah, absolutely.
I guess cutting him a little bit of slack. I mean, you still, if I was in the NFL, I just probably wouldn't be betting on anything, to be completely honest with you.
And I think that's probably where we're heading. It's going to be like, if there's a situation like that that's so particular and that you wouldn't necessarily think is anything wrong with it, just don't put yourself in that. You don't need to bet, man. These guys are making so much money, and I know that betting is usually about more than profiting. It's just about having a little fun and seeing if you can be right about this kind of stuff. But just stay away from it, man. You guys don't need the money, and it's just not going to be worth it. Either that or the NFLPA needs to somehow get these restrictions loosened, because that's silly. Like that he bet on, probably rivalry week of college football. Dude's just in a hotel room.
An Alabama game.
He's not playing most of the season, so I'm sure he's bored, and it's just it just sucks. But hopefully Jameson Williams can turn his career around and come back popping off after these 6 games, but we will see. Pat, I did want to mention this. I should have mentioned this right off the top. Pat, we had a little bit of breaking news right before the podcast. Nothing major, but James Robinson has been released by the Patriots after signing a 2-year deal originally this offseason. James Robinson is no longer a New England Patriot. Not an overly consequential thing, but as a Patriots fan and as somebody rooting for James Robinson, from his Jaguar days, sucks to see. I hate the fact that this injury seems to have kind of just cooked his career. He seemed like he was in line for, at least a backup role. I mean, Ramondre is going to get the lion's share of the carries. Ty Montgomery is going to handle the third down work most of the time. But James Robinson, you would think, would spell him at times. Not going to be the case. James Robinson hits free agency. So just wanted to touch on that.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, the injury really killed him. But this is an undrafted free agent. And more often than not, these guys are undrafted for a reason. And he struck gold there for a little bit, and then, one kind of injury with a guy who, may not have been this high caliber of a player. That's going to happen. But, I think it shows well for Pierre Strong. Somebody asked last week, what we thought about OTAs, and it's not much. The only thing really is kind of just the fringe guys. Yeah. I don't care how guys are performing, but it's more so who's getting cut, who's sticking around. And I think this is a perfect example that Pierre Strong is probably going to be the third guy in a backfield where they may use 3 guys.
Absolutely. James Robinson, I will forever remember you for my fantasy team, your rookie year. You were a lifesaver. I believe I headed into that year with basically only Ezekiel Elliott, who was still good at the time, as my running back. Otherwise, my RB2 would have been in a similar situation as to what I was this past year, Pat, with starting out with Chase Edmonds and then rotating a bunch of just garbage cans. But J-Rob allowed me to have just some really, really good running backs that year. So I will forever appreciate him for that. J-Rob, I salute you, and I hope you find a job elsewhere. Unfortunate to see him get cut by New England.
I'm sure he will.
Hopefully. I mean, you look at, they signed him to a 2-year deal. That tells me that he was very unimpressive in these brief camp periods, and so they're like, we've seen enough, and we don't need you. And for a running back depth chart that, it's not the deepest, but it's not the shallowest. I would have thought he'd have a place there, but hopefully he catches on somewhere else. Pat, some bigger running back news. We talked last week speculating about Dalvin Cook seemed to be on his way out of Minnesota. It was all but done, but now it is done. Dalvin Cook has been released. We kind of struggled to figure out, some landing spots for him, and it's even harder now, but at least he has hit the market. The one thing that we do know is kind of the money that he's looking for, and it does make sense. He is expecting to be paid more than $5 million a year, and that should be obvious because that's what the Vikings are going to be paying for his dead cap number. Yeah. And if he was willing to accept $5 million, he would have just stuck around because the Vikings are now paying him to not be on their team that much money, or at least they're taking that much of a cap hit. They would have just kept him around if he was willing to accept that. So Dalvin Cook looking for something in, I mean, if it's not going to be $5 million, I'm guessing between the $6 to $10 million annual range. And he said he's willing to wait and find the right situation. And he's probably going to have to wait at that number, Pat. This is an incredibly interesting case study of running backs, I think, because it's a guy who we talked about last week has, you know, some juice left in the tank. We know he's probably got 1 or 2 more years of solid productivity, even though he took a nosedive in efficiency last year.
Probably still in his prime, though.
Probably still in his prime, even though it's the back end of it. So I'll be curious to see how the market values him. But if he's saying he wants at least, you know, $6 million a year, that can be hard to fork over for these teams that, you know, see that lack of efficiency and have a decent running back or 2 on their roster already, which, as we talked about, most teams do. Pat, your prediction for where he was going to end up seems like the Broncos are in fact out. That is the latest report on Dalvin Cook. I mean, again, it makes sense. They have 2 running backs who, even though Javonte Williams is expected to be, you know, maybe limited to start the year or on the PUP list or whatever, seems like he might be trending toward week 1, even though he's going to be a little bit limited. They have Javonte and they have Samaje Perine. There's not really a ton of room for Dalvin Cook. So unless Javonte were to have a worst case scenario and have to miss a chunk of the beginning of the season, it didn't make a lot of sense. And then if he did come back, it wouldn't really work either.
Yeah, honestly, a situation almost similar that I've seen tossed around a little bit is the Jets. You know, it seems that Breece Hall kind of had a bit of a cleaner tear than Javonte Williams, and the fact that he only tore his ACL as opposed to Williams, who basically tore everything. And, you know, if you're worried about Breece Hall not being there, Dalvin Cook's the perfect kind of guy. And, you know, you could ease your way back. They could split it 50-50 even, because let's be honest here, like, Michael Carter, Bam Knight, like, they're fine, but it's like it's nothing you'd be like, oh no, we don't need Dalvin Cook, we're all set.
Yeah, it is a situation that fantasy managers are absolutely dreading, because there are some backfields here that you look and you add Dalvin Cook to, and it might take a guy who was, you know, kind of on your radar and just push him off of it because you've added Dalvin Cook to that backfield. You add Dalvin Cook to a Breece Hall backfield, and everybody's going to be mad, whether you own him or not, because now he's not a guy you're even going to be targeting in fantasy drafts. That is not a backfield I want him to go to. I'm a big Breece Hall fan, and I think he's going to bounce back this season. I do not want Dalvin Cook muddying up that goddamn backfield to stay away. So, but again, it's where real football and fantasy football come into conflict. They would love to have him in that backfield, I'm sure. Whether they want to do it at that price, I don't know. But if you could say, hey, add Dalvin Cook to this backfield for free, they'd do it in a minute, whereas fantasy owners would be like, God, no. Yeah,
and the thing is, like, we've talked numerous times, you know, in the past few weeks about guys like Ezekiel Elliott and Kareem Hunt. Like, those are guys who are, Leonard Fournette, guys who are clearly going to be the complement. You know, if they go somewhere, they're clearly going to be a second option, kind of a short down yardage kind of guy. Dalvin Cook is better than that. Like, Dalvin Cook is like a guy, at the very least, that probably commands like a 60-40 split. So it's just this point in the offseason, I think, once we get into minicamp, you know, injuries, things like that is really what's going to open the door for him. So I really don't know where he's going to go. It could even be, like with injuries, it could even be a team that's not on our radar right now.
Yeah, it could be a long wait for Dalvin Cook, and you're right, it could be a situation where, you know, even you get to preseason games and somebody goes down with an unfortunate injury, and then they bring in Dalvin Cook and they say, all right, this is your destiny now. But it's a really, really, really weird situation. It's so reflective of the entire running back market, Pat. And another guy who's kind of struggling with the running back market is Saquon Barkley. Saquon is unsure if he's going to reach a deal with the New York Giants. And this is something we've kind of been building toward, but it's also been a no news might be good news kind of situation. But Saquon doesn't sound overly optimistic himself on the Giants getting a deal done with him. He's saying he's willing to listen, but it doesn't sound like they're close in money at all. And, you know, he came out and said, like, this is what happens. The market is going to get messed up when all of the top guys who were free agents got tagged. And that's what happened with Tony Pollard and Josh Jacobs and Saquon Barkley. Saquon now yet to sign his tag. Pat, what's your guess for how this plays out? Because I have no idea. This is a situation where I really hope it gets resolved because, again, the fantasy footballer in me is like, Saquon on the Giants, he's familiar with that team. He's the only weapon there. It's worked before. I would feel rock solid about him. I'd feel rock hard about Saquon as a first-round pick. But if he goes somewhere else, I don't know. It gets messier. What's your feeling on this?
I think he's going to be with the Giants, and I do think he's going to be on the field, whether they do reach a deal or whether he plays on the tag. I think, you know, there's been talk, like, does he sit out? And we've seen recently, like, the most prolific guy to sit out was Le'Veon Bell, and we saw how his career just basically nosedived.
He himself says he regrets it recently.
From that point on, like, especially at Saquon, I mean, he's not old, but, you know, like, with the injuries he's got and, you know, the wear and tear he's got, you do not want to sit out a whole year.
No.
And again, like, if I'm the Giants, I hold the line here. I don't, let Saquon dictate it, because, like I said, when they tagged Saquon and, gave Jones the big deal, I said that was a great move because running backs are replaceable. And I mean, granted, they really don't have an obvious replacement right now in that backfield, but, like, they're improving on the offensive line. They're improving everywhere. It's like, if Saquon says, I'm going to sit out, or unless you pay me this, if I'm the Giants, I say, okay. Like, yeah, as great as he is, but, with the risk of injury and just, I'm not a fan of paying running backs what he's looking for.
Yeah, and it's a really weird situation because, Pat, somebody's lying. The latest quotes coming from Saquon were basically, everything's painting me as being greedy. I don't want to reset the running back market. I just want to be paid what I'm worth. Either he is lying about that, or the report that he turned down a deal worth close to $14 million a year is wrong. Because the $14 million a year, let's say it's 13.5, sure. That is exactly in line with what he said, which is that he wants to be paid what he's worth, but not reset the market. Resetting the market would put him at over 16 million, because that's what Christian McCaffrey is making per year. The 13.5 or 14, whatever, that would put him third highest running back paid, above Derrick Henry, who's making 12.5 a year, below Alvin Kamara, who's making 15 a year. Yikes, by the way.
Gross.
Yeah. There's some non-truth going on here. And look, when you're in heated negotiations with a star player, that's bound to happen. There's bound to be some misinformation. I'm just curious who's lying. And to be honest, I feel like the report of the $14 million thing is probably just not true, because I'm tending to believe Saquon in the sense that he just wants to be paid, a decently big running back contract. And I feel like that $14 million a year figure, look, maybe there was some weird lack of incentives in there, something that he didn't like, but I don't know. I feel like that contract on its own, on the surface, would be enough to get him to sign. I don't know. It's a very, very weird situation. I hope they can resolve it, because, again, in fantasy football, I like to find guys who are kind of the safest possible picks in the first round, and no matter how talented Saquon is, switching teams makes you no longer a safe pick, because you don't know exactly how another team is going to use him. You don't know exactly how he's going to adjust to their scheme, their line, whatever. I've seen him be productive on the New York Giants, and that's why I know he is one of my kind of most solid first-round picks, especially if you're targeting a running back.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, especially like a guy with the injury history. I mean, again, granted, he proved everyone wrong last year. He stayed healthy, played a full season last year. Good for him. We'll see if he can do it again. But I just think that the question marks are there enough for the Giants to kind of stand their ground. I think $14 million would be fair. But if he wants more than that, then if I'm the Giants, like, I really don't know. But again, at the end of the day, I do think it either works out one way or another, and he's playing on the Giants this year.
And I will say this too, I tweeted this earlier, and I think I've talked about this on the pod in the past. I think we need to get to a point where running back rookie contracts are shorter than other positions, even if it's just by a year. I know that's going to be a really hard sell, because NFL owners have all the leverage by that not being the case right now, by it being equal to all other contracts. But you have a position where their career is basically over by 29, no matter how good they are. There's like one or two guys at any given time who is productive over that age consistently. If you are not even able to get to your second contract until at times where you're like 26 years old, 25 years old, and teams are like, okay, we don't even want to, we're looking 4 years down the line. A 4-year extension is pretty standard. We're looking 4 years down the line. We don't want to be paying you 15, 16 million at that age. You're going to be bad.
Yeah.
They need to be able to hit free agency a little bit sooner. That's just kind of where I'm at with it. I think it's only fair given the position.
I can see the owners and the Players Association not going for that either, because you look at it, especially with how running back draft capital is basically tanking outside of, these really, like guys like Bijan Robinson, is that, teams, honestly, the owners may say like, okay, cool, we're going to draft you in the third round. You get 3 years and we're not paying you that much. Like, yeah. I could see them getting pushback from the Players Association on something like that. That, even if the owners may collude and just say, hey, let's let running backs fall even further and pay them less.
Yeah, the entire position is just used and abused, and something needs to be done about it. And I know nobody's going to be wiping tears for Saquon if he signs the tag and makes $10 million a year. It's just about fair treatment compared to these other positions, because as of right now, they don't have it. They just kind of get run into the ground before their rookie deal is up, and then by the time it's up, they're like, all right, bye, go enjoy making $2 million as a backup because we've cooked you over the course of your rookie contract. And we've seen it time and time again. So hopefully that gets adjusted at some point, but I am not holding my breath, Pat, as you said. From running backs to wide receiver, Pat, DeAndre Hopkins is still going to be in the news cycle. We've got some official visits, though, for Hopkins finally. I believe as we're recording this, the Titans visit may be over and done with or about to be, but the Titans were the first visit that Hopkins scheduled with his free agency. Second visit, Pat, the New England Patriots. How about that? So I talked about them in a little bit of a biased way, a hopeful way, that, the Patriots' interest in him. I was hoping that it was legit, and I was hoping that Hopkins didn't have too much beef with Bill O'Brien, and that it would leave the door open for him to potentially come to the Patriots, give Mac Jones a number one wide receiver. We know he's at least open to it because he wouldn't waste his time going on a visit. We know he wouldn't waste his time going on a visit if he was like, absolutely not. I hate that Bill O'Brien guy. Mac Jones sucks. I refuse. He's open to it. I think the fact that, we talked about last week, the Texans rumors told me a lot about that maybe the quality of the team isn't the most important thing. It's just about certain aspects of the team that he cares about. And if you remember, Pat, the original requirements that he had, other than the podcast where he listed just the best quarterbacks in the league that he wanted to play with, he wanted a good defense, check. Stable management for the Patriots, check. And a quarterback who loves the game. And Mac is goofy, but he loves football. I mean, he wouldn't have thrown tantrums over Matt Patricia's incompetence last year if he didn't love football. So whether he's all that good at it, I don't know yet. We'll find out. We'd be able to find out a lot easier if we gave him a number one weapon for the first time in his career. So I'm hopeful that DeAndre Hopkins will end up a New England Patriot. It would kind of continue an obnoxious string of luck that I've had as a sports fan as I sit here with UConn's championship, the Nuggets' hopeful impending championship, and then if Hopkins comes to the Pats and makes us, division contenders, or I won't say favorites, but at least up there, just swimming in it, just having a great time. Pat, how do you feel about the latest Hopkins developments? Do you think he ends up a Titan or Patriot? Or do you think first in a few visits?
We didn't mention the Titans at all, and I think the main reason why is just that they kind of stink. With how competitive the AFC is going to be, even with the 3 wild cards, because they're not going to win that division with Jacksonville looking as strong as they are. And I mean, you look at it alone. 3 wild cards. We're going to talk about the AFC West today. They're probably going to get 2 teams. Who knows what Denver? Yep. The AFC East might get 2 wild card teams, and then the North is going to be competitive too. It's like the Titans. We're looking at the Titans team that could be in the bottom 3 in the conference. And I mean, if Hopkins is more so looking at it from, hey, I'm going to take a 1-year prove-it deal, Tennessee might be a good place because they've got targets available. I really like Treylon Burks this year, and they do run the ball a lot, but that's a situation where he can go and be the top dog. It's similar to New England in the fact that, the offense may not fully cater to it, but, I mean, Tannehill worked with A.J. Brown, and I'm a little more apprehensive about New England because, like I said, their last alpha guy was Randy Moss, and that was, almost 15 years ago at this point now? So,
yeah.
So I don't see, but I wouldn't put it past Bill Belichick and Bill O'Brien to bring him in that situation. I'm interested to see where these other visits go. Does he visit Kansas City? We'll talk about Kansas City later. Does he visit Buffalo? Does he visit these teams? The Jets. People have talked about the Jets. It's but the Patriots and the Titans would definitely be more boring choices. But it does make sense.
How dare you? No, the Titans I found really interesting because that tells me that he's kind of open to everything. I mean, I guess the defense management and quarterback that loves the game thing all do apply to the Titans as well. So, I guess we should have taken him at his word that he's not just looking for the very best teams, but maybe the teams that he believes can get there. I'm sure he, as a player, appreciates a guy like Derrick Henry and knows how good he is and how much that would probably open up the pass game for him. I mean, I think defenses were probably loading the box with 8 guys literally every snap last year, considering the Titans receivers were me, you, and Nick Westbrook-Akina. So, I mean, he knows he'll have plenty of targets there. He knows that the AFC South is, somewhat open. I mean, the Jags are going to enter the season as the favorites, but otherwise the Titans kind of ran that division for 3 or 4 years. They can easily get back there if they continue to try to make moves to try and win. Even though we thought they were on their way down, but I mean they've just kind of refused to die. It seems like they're just trying to tread water.
They're never a team that's going to be really really bad, but in this AFC, winning 7 or 8 games is going to put you near the bottom, honestly.
Yeah, exactly. So the teams that Hopkins has set visits with, I found incredibly interesting. I was figuring his first 2 visits would be the freaking Ravens and the Bills. I don't know. I mean, I know the Bills apparently are out because of the money aspect, but very, very surprising teams to see him visit off the bat. You just wonder if this free agency tour is going to continue for weeks on end where he kind of just meets with a million teams, or Who knows? Maybe it's over by the end of this week, and D-Hop will be a New England Patriot catching some balls from Mac Jones. A guy can hope. A guy can hope, Pat. I also had to change
I know.
I had to change our little background here because I had our graphic up from last week. We are not doing an AFC North fantasy preview. We are doing the AFC West. It is updated now. AFC West. It's funny because the rest of the topics I didn't notice because they were all basically the same. It's just Dalvin Cook, Hopkins, and then I was like, wait, there's no Saquon. I know I put Saquon on there. It's because we had last week's.
Let's do an AFC North preview for the third week in a row. Like
let's just week in a row. The episode lost to time. The episode that got saved. And you know what? We'll just hone our skills and really make sure our opinions are set in stone on that.
I have more to say.
Actually, we have more to say about Allen Robinson on that Pittsburgh Steelers receiving core.
God.
I have so many thoughts about Mr. Spoon, Fork, Garbage Can, whatever. Speaking of that fantasy preview, Pat, we can move right into that. So last week, AFC North, one of the most fun divisions to talk about in terms of fantasy. Right behind it, though, is the AFC West. I mean, you've got so many teams here with a lot of fantasy talent, a division that I kind of thought all 4 teams would have had a playoff chance at last year before I realized that the Broncos were just a living, breathing dumpster fire, and the Raiders were just going to kind of Raider again. But, Pat, the tippy top of this division, as always, is the Kansas City Chiefs. Patrick Mahomes, QB1 in fantasy overall, 0% surprising. I don't even do you have anything to say about this other than duh?
Yeah. Basically, you talk about safety. He may not have the rushing upside of a guy like Lamar or Josh Allen or Jalen Hurts, but he can still run the ball. It may not be by design, but he finds a way to stockpile some rushing yards there. Yeah, it's a no-brainer. Like you said, he may not end up as the QB1, but going into drafts, yeah.
It's just crazy to me because you look at the weapons that the Chiefs have, and again, this year, they're going to be kind of underwhelming beyond Travis Kelce, and yet you just feel so good about Patrick Mahomes. No concerns whatsoever because of just how damn good he is.
We're looking at probably one of, if not the most talented quarterbacks ever. He may not go down as the best ever, but we're looking at probably the most talented quarterback ever in an Andy Reid system. Who just knows how to make it work. Yeah, it is a no-brainer. And I mean, I guess same thing with Travis Kelce. I don't think we really need to talk about him. But I guess the question with Kelce is how early do you feel good about taking him?
Yeah, that is true. How did I not write down Travis Kelce on our little sheet here, Pat?
I figured it was a given.
It was just too obvious. It is a given, but I did want to put. I guess putting tight end 1 doesn't do any justice.
Yeah, I am curious to see where he's going overall, though. He is on Underdog. His ADP 6.6. So wow.
I mean, it makes sense.
We're talking a guy that's going to be taken in the middle of the first round. Do you take Travis Kelce in the middle of the first round if you're picking there?
Can I can't bring myself to do it, and it's personal preference. It's not that I could make it work to an extent, and I mean having him in that spot, locking it down all year while everybody else is just struggling with their, as much as we love them, their Chigakonkwos and their Greg Dulciches and their whoever the hell. You'd feel great about it, but Pat, maybe it's just because I'm old school. I can't leave the first round without a running back or receiver. Ideally, a running back. I can't do it.
If I'm at 6 or 7, I don't know if I could do it. But if I'm at 10 through 12, and I guess we'll talk about it more once we're done with our division previews and more of general stuff here. But there's some of these receivers that are going at the end of the first round that I'm not crazy nuts about. So if running backs do fly off like they normally do in the beginning of drafts, I wouldn't put it past myself to take Kelce in the first round, but 6 or 7, I don't know. I really don't know. But like you said, it's just so nice going into the week knowing that the worst position, you have the guy. You have the guy. He may disappoint you one time in a in a 17-game schedule. It's a no-brainer. Again, I think it'll be more so about how my specific drafts fall in terms of what I would do with Travis Kelce. I'm devastated because I've been in a keeper league and I've had Kelce forever, and the league disbanded. So that's the only Travis Kelce I've ever had. So it's
I've never had him in our league, Pat, ever. And guys, whenever I reference our league, that's the main fantasy league I play in. I've been playing in it for 12 years.
This is year 13,
yeah.
Crazy.
So this is that's the league that I'm trying the hardest in, and anytime I reference it, just know that it's that's what's getting my all. I've never had Kelce in our league. And Pat, you mentioned some of the receivers at the back end of the first or even the early second, where Travis Kelce's going on Underdog right now. So he's above Stephon Diggs and AJ Brown. I don't know if I can get on board with that, but the receivers that go after that,
I think I could. I think I can.
Could you really?
I think so.
I mean, I don't blame you, but then
it's
the
definitely
receivers after
a debate.
that.
It's definitely a debate.
The receivers after that, I'm comfortable taking him over. I mean, there's CeeDee Lamb, Devontae Adams, Garrett Wilson. Like, at that point, I'll take Kelsey. And I mean, look, the rankings reflect that everybody feels that way, and more so because he is above Brown and Diggs in addition to those guys. But that's where I'm like, I could deal with how weird my roster is going to look after the first round with me being the only guy that has filled the tight end slot. And also, he's just such an anomaly that I feel uncomfortable taking him because, Pat, he's going to be 34 after the first 5 weeks of the season.
We've seen tight ends can get up there in age. I mean, Gronk was unfortunately the outlier in the other direction just because of injuries, but we've seen tight ends go. But I mean, this guy never gets hurt. You know, he's in great shape, and he is an anomaly in the sense too that he's not like some crazy physical specimen.
No,
like obviously he's a tough for matchups, but that was Gronk's thing, was that Gronk was on, we couldn't guard him, but now like Kelsey's not quite like that. So he's just fantastic. And we're looking at, again, same thing with Mahomes. We're looking at, when it's all said and done, Kelsey is very well could be the best tight end, if not top 3 at minimum, I would say.
Oh, I think he's already top 3 for a guy that operates as a tight end so much in the middle of the field. For him to not get banged up or hurt all that often is wild. He's just such a smart player. And look, I know Cooper Kupp, I believe it torn ACL this past year, but he really is the tight end version of Cooper Kupp, where other than, that one instance of getting hurt, he's just such a smart player, finding the open parts of the field, not putting himself in harm's way. And I guess that comes with having a smart quarterback, too, that doesn't lead you into harm's way. But just, if you wonder why Travis Kelce gets open, he's just so smart at reading the defenses himself that he gets to those spots. And there's a reason that you're watching games, and for some reason there's nobody within 15 yards of Travis Kelce. And he's going to keep doing that until he hangs him up.
And he's such a good guy. He's such a likable guy. Yeah. He's probably one of my favorite players in the league, too. It's just hard not to root for him especially with how good he is.
Absolutely. Pat, one part of the Chiefs offense and fantasy football that is not as straightforward is their backfield. So you've got Isaiah Pacheco in there at RB25, Jerick McKinnon at RB43, and just for posterity's sake, Clyde Edwards-Helaire at RB63. I think most people have been frustrated off of Clyde Edwards-Helaire. I think we're kind of all done with him. Look, maybe he gets some touches, maybe he becomes a guy, who knows, but probably not. Pat, Pacheco and McKinnon is such an interesting case, and I did some research here on Pacheco and McKinnon. So if you remember, after the bye week is basically when Pacheco kind of got installed as, more of a factor in this Chiefs offense. So I actually went from week 10 on, and I'm looking at red zone touches here because this is kind of where they differ, I felt, or that's what I thought. It seemed to me like Jerick McKinnon was just always on the field in the red zone. And for a guy like Pacheco, who's kind of a non-factor in the receiving game and is going to continue to be that way because McKinnon's on this roster, you need to have the scoring potential with Pacheco. So from week 10 on, Isaiah Pacheco had 28 red zone touches, and McKinnon had 23. But 12 of Pacheco's red zone touches came in one game. One game. That was week 12. So if you go...
What?
So, yeah, it was crazy. And they were all rushes, too. I don't know why they were in the red zone so much and why he ran the ball so much. I had to double-check the stat 3 times. So McKinnon
That also means he wasn't scoring then. If he wasn't getting he wasn't finding the end zone then.
That's true. McKinnon also had sort of an outlier of 6 red zone touches in week 13. Overall, when I looked at their red zone touches week by week, they were around 2 to 4. Normal number. So if we take out both their outlier weeks, we just go week 14 and on, and this is through the Super Bowl. From week 14 on, Pacheco had 11 red zone touches and McKinnon had 12. So what I don't want to see, and what I don't think I've seen so far, is the narrative that Pacheco is going to be the red zone guy because he's the bigger guy and he's the runner. That's not going to happen. That's not how the Chiefs operate.
Yeah, I was going to say I would go to the length to say he's not going to be the red zone guy, which is crazy.
Right, and it's very strange, and it just goes in line with the fact that the Chiefs, I believe, were the 4th pass-heaviest team in the NFL last year, and that trend continues when they get in close, when they're in the red zone.
And they love those gadget plays in the end zone. We've seen Mahomes shovel to anyone and everyone. Even before CEH got hurt last year, it seemed like he was catching a touchdown every game, and then McKinnon had that insane touchdown run. And he's throwing shovels to Kelsey. You're going to be seeing end arounds from Kadarius Toney, Sky Moore. It's like, is the opportunity for Isaiah Pacheco there, especially when most leagues now are playing PPR? It's like, again, if you're taking Pacheco, if you're in a kind of you punt running back, maybe, but I'm at least leery of it.
Yeah, I don't want to overthink it too much, Pat, because I do love Pacheco as a player, and I want to remember that when I'm considering whether to draft him or not. That, yes, you have all these circumstantial things, but more than anything, can the guy ball? And he can. And as RB25, I don't mind that. To me, I'm more shocked at McKinnon being RB43, and I guess that's because he just wasn't signed for a while, and that's fair. I mean, it's a guy who was a free agent up until a few weeks ago, but Pat, McKinnon, at the end of the year, these are his PPR totals from week 13 through week 18. 14, 32, 34, 12, 22, 8. This guy was a tank at the end of last season in PPR leagues. Like, I don't know how he can be RB43 right now with numbers like that and coming back to play the same exact role. It's very strange to me. And especially the difference between him and Pacheco in terms of where they're ranked, 25 to 43. McKinnon might be the better back in this backfield. Like, Pacheco's probably going to have a higher snap total, which is maybe what's driving this, but McKinnon may be getting the more quality touches.
Oh, absolutely. And you look at McKinnon, like, this was a guy, granted, it was a while ago, but this was a guy who was productive in Minnesota. He was going to be the guy in San Francisco before the ACL injury. And then obviously it's taken him a while, but now he's carved out more of a role. But, like, again, if Pacheco goes down, like, even though he's a smaller back, like, this is a guy who could realistically still, play on first downs in short yardage situations. If I have to have a Chiefs running back, I would rather have McKinnon. But not to say that Pacheco's not going to have his own value, but just the situation for McKinnon is so good, especially at the value.
Yeah, and look, I really love Pacheco's talent. I love that when I see him run, he just looks like a jackrabbit on crack. I mean, he runs so angry that it makes me like him, but I also have to take a step back and just look at the opportunities and realize I don't know if it fits the ADP. I mean, I guess if he's 80.8 overall as RB25. If I'm getting him in, the 7th round, I'm probably cool with that. But you look at the guys going behind him, Pat, the number of touches for the guys going right behind him, Rachaad White, as of right now, has that backfield to himself. James Conner.
Your boy Chase Edmonds is there too.
Yeah, shut up. James Conner, who he has the backfield very much to himself as well, albeit on a bad team, and he's also an uninspiring player, but still the touches are going to be crazy. And then David Montgomery, who we expect to be, the goal line guy and get a decent chunk of touches in Detroit on a really good team. I don't know. I go back and forth on Pacheco because I love the talent and I love watching him play, but the Chiefs offense is so spreaded around that I don't see him becoming this, like, big deal that people would like him to be.
I would definitely go Montgomery and Rachaad White. I would go those guys over Pacheco. I don't know about James. James Conner's got to just be one of the nastiest starting running backs, which is someone's gonna take him and he's gonna give you some good weeks, but it's just like, I can't bring myself to do it unless he falls significantly.
I feel about James Conner the way I felt about Leonard Fournette before last season, where I was just like, I just want no part of you, and I don't really have a great reason why, because I understand there are arguments for you being relevant in fantasy football, but I'm just good. And honestly, Fournette put up more good weeks than I thought he would, but he was also, you could tell he was basically washed last year, and there was just nothing you could really do about it. So Conner, I feel like, is heading more that direction. The fact he's been in the league a while, he's, again, Pat, I feel like he's probably not that old, but he's just got the mileage on him of being a running back. James Conner is 28. Okay, so he is actually getting up to the higher level age for running backs. Just turned 28.
But just a guy who's been hurt, maybe Jonathan Gannon. I don't even know who they brought in as their offensive coordinator, but that's a team where they're going to be so bad. They're going to be so bad. And then the injuries. But, I mean, if the guy can stay healthy, he'll probably have a decent year. I don't know how we got into a James Conner conversation right now. But
I'm not touching James Conner.
F's in the chat for James Conner.
He's gone. Again, Pat, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, RB63, just nowhere near my radar, with McKinnon and Pacheco ahead of him now, who are clearly better running backs.
He's going to be nothing more than a guy when Pacheco needs a rest for a drive or for a couple carries. Yeah. He's nothing more than that. I'm sure he'll get some gadget plays again, but I think Andy Reid's just kind of going to finally admit that they just whiffed. They whiffed on this guy, and Andy Reid's kind of not the guy to force it. He's going to play guys who help you win, as seen by Pacheco being a 7th round pick and helping them win a Super Bowl.
Yeah.
If it's not happening with Clyde, then it's just over for him in Kansas City as a fantasy relevant player.
and they have already declined his fifth-year option, so I think they've kind of already admitted defeat on the guy. Don't expect to see him in a relevant fantasy way at all this year. Pat, the receivers here is kind of where the conversation gets interesting for the Chiefs, because you have a quarterback that's so good like Patrick Mahomes. You have his number one weapon in Travis Kelce, but what happens beyond that? This past year, nothing. Really, the best receiver fantasy-wise ended up being Juju Smith-Schuster, which was not a surprise. What was a surprise is that only translated to being wide receiver 27. Now, I did go back and I wanted to compare this to the Patriots during the Gronk years, because I was curious how often, with a dominant tight end, they had a receiver that also ended up being fantasy relevant. And honestly, Pat, I was expecting to see a lot more years where they didn't have receivers high up in fantasy, but most years they had a receiver who at least performed as a wide receiver too. They had actually Wes Welker, I think, topped out as like wide receiver 8 one year. Edelman had years where he was like wide receiver 15, wide receiver 12 in that range. So odds say, especially with the turnover, since they kind of hit a reset button with their receiving core this year, odds say that a receiver will turn into at least a wide receiver 2 on this team at some point over the next few years.
Well, it's tough to tell because the Chiefs have had Tyreek Hill for so long. So it's like of course that someone's going to produce. But yeah, I mean Juju. But again, you look at Juju stuff last year. Correct me if I'm wrong. A lot of his production came in like a 3 or 4 game stretch.
As a Juju owner, yes, it did, and he was on my bench most of it.
And But you look at the guys they have now, and they're kind of similar. Like, they're kind of more gadget guys. They've got tons of speed. And to be honest, I like them both a lot, especially for where they're going. Excuse me. Kadarius Toney's a guy that obviously they went out and got, He was a guy that I really liked going into last year. It just turns out it was never going to work for him in New York, but I really like Kadarius Toney this year. Like we talked about, he's going to get some gadget plays, probably at the goal line as well. And then Sky Moore's value is fantastic. He was a guy who consistently got more involved in that offense throughout the year, and they didn't really go and get anyone to replace Juju, so that basically means, they did draft Rashee Rice, but I see that as a similar situation, where he's probably going to be more eased into it. But, what Sky Moore, wide receiver 50-something, wide receiver 56, when Rashee Rice is wide receiver 60, I think that's insane value for Sky Moore. A guy that's, and we talked about your bench guys. You're chasing upside on the bench, and I think Sky Moore is nothing but upside.
Yeah, I think Kadarius Toney, you mentioned, I think he's going to be the most polarizing player in fantasy football drafts, because I don't think there's a single player with a wider range of outcomes than Kadarius Toney, Pat. Would you be shocked if Kadarius Toney put up 1,500 yards and 12 touchdowns? It would be a higher end of what you'd expect, but I wouldn't be shocked. In a Patrick Mahomes-led offense, if he's actually healthy all year, that would not shock me. It also would not shock me if he put up 300 total yards and was hurt half the year. I have no idea what to expect from this guy. He's been so hyped up basically off of 2 games he had with the Giants that I feel like people don't even realize the numbers he's actually put up in total. That year with the Giants, his rookie year, he only had 420 total receiving yards in 10 games. And then with the Chiefs last year, 171 yards, although he did score twice. He's a guy who's such an electric talent. And I'm trying to figure out where I'm going to land on the fence of Kadarius Toney, because I don't know. Where I am right now is that he's well worth the draft capital of wide receiver 38.
Oh, absolutely.
Well worth it. And if I'm going to take a stab at any of these Chiefs receivers, it's him, because he's shown by far the most talent, the most explosiveness out of all these guys. I think Sky Moore probably takes that he's going to see the field more than he did last year. He's probably going to be almost a 1-for-1 replacement of Mecole Hardman, where it's like he's going to have games where he pops off because he does the big plays and he's a speed guy. But Toney, the Chiefs themselves are talking him up. I think I'm buying the hype a little bit. I think I am. And I will take him at wide receiver 38 every time, but I expect that to rise as we get closer and closer to draft season.
Excuse me for 1 second, Brandon. Technical difficulties.
Yes. Take your time, Pat. So, I mean, this Chiefs offense is just very, very interesting. Marquez Valdez-Scantling, not a guy that I'm interested in the least, but Kadarius Toney, a guy who can pop off. Pat, did I fill enough for you?
Yeah, my ring light was fucking killing my eyes, man. I can't take it, so I had to.
No,
as a fellow TikTok star, my ring just killing me. So I went with light. We're getting a little shine of light on me, like I feel like the Messiah now. So let's go with that for the sake of my vision.
Yeah, for those of you that haven't seen Pat on TikTok, he actually does belly dances where he pours hot chocolate all over himself. It's very high quality.
You know what?
Stuff.
Honestly, that doesn't sound like a bad way to get involved.
I think you'd be TikTok partnered immediately. As I don't even think that's a thing, but you'd be TikTok verified right off the bat. The hot chocolate belly guy. All right, the Kansas City Chiefs obviously have. It's just kind of a hotbed for fantasy production, but you don't know where it's going to come from exactly.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It'll be interesting to see how this team plays out. As of right now, we know that Mahomes and Kelsey are the slam dunks, and then the rest of it. Good luck figuring it out because we're all trying here. I think like guys. We like guys a little, and that's kind of just where we're at with all of them. But they all have plenty of upside because Chiefs. Pat, the Los Angeles Chargers. Justin Herbert is QB7. I think that's a good spot for him. He's a guy that I'm very optimistic for with Kellen Moore now as the offensive coordinator. Joe Lombardi is out of there. A lot of people think he was kind of holding them back. And Herbert and Moore are, close. They've known each other for a little while here. And I think that relationship could be beneficial. I mean, Pat, the fact that the Cowboys got rid of Kellen Moore because he wanted to score too many points basically is what happened. Tells me that, him going with Justin Herbert and trying to help his fantasy production probably will go fairly well. Pat, are you in agreement that Herbert's just kind of he's in the right tier, right? We talked about him being with Trevor behind all the running quarterbacks. This is where he belongs.
Yeah, I would definitely peg him as the fucking goddamn. I gotta stop saying that.
How many guys are you gonna peg, Pat?
I'm gonna tab him. I'm going to slot him in as the second best non-running quarterback behind Joe Burrow, if we're calling Mahomes a running quarterback as well. Okay. But out of the guys who are pocket passers, I would rank him behind Burrow. I think that he's going to flourish with Kellen Moore. I saw something about his short yardage attempts under Joe Lombardi, and it just made me want to puke. He was just clearly holding this guy back, and I think it's going to benefit the whole offense.
I agree, Pat. But here's something I ran into when I was researching for all this is I've been on the Justin Herbert is going to have a career year train ever since they signed Kellen Moore, and I'm just very excited for them. And yet, I can't get excited about their receivers. And logically, that doesn't make sense because if he's going to have a career year, his receivers are going to be good. So I don't know what to make of Keenan Allen and Mike Williams because I want no part of them. But should I? I don't know what to do here.
I am in on Keenan Allen a bit just because, I think he has a distinct role. He's the slot guy. He's the guy that's going to get the targets. I think Quentin Johnston really hurts Mike Williams' value. We were talking about it in the pre-draft, how, you mocked him to the Chargers, and I just didn't like it because I felt they were too similar. Mm-hmm. And, as a guy as a Mike Williams owner last year, the guy's really fucking good. He... With how big he is, but how big of a deep threat he is, that combo is so good. But he's obviously had problems staying on the field, and it's high variance on these guys that are deep balls. I would rather go with a guy like Keenan Allen, who the ceiling's probably not quite there, but he's got a much higher floor, and I think Johnston probably steals some of those deep balls, probably steals some of those jump balls in the end zone that would go to Williams. So Allen at wide receiver 20, I think that's fair. I think he's a mid to low end wide receiver too, but Williams, I hate it because, like I said, I really like the guy. I really liked having him last year, but I'm just worried with Quentin Johnston.
I think there's so many just question marks around both the receivers because Keenan Allen, he's 31. He's had so many injuries. He seems to have lost somewhat of a step, but again, it doesn't matter as much for a guy that plays the type of receiver that he plays.
Exactly.
In PPR, if he can stay healthy, sure. That is a tenuous bet at best at this point. Let me see who he's ranked around and see how I feel about them. So, here's where I'm at. I think the guys that kind of are directly behind Keenan Allen in ADP right now or right with him, I kind of prefer them just because of the injury history that Keenan's dealt with. You got Christian Watson, Jerry Jeudy, and then Mike Williams. So take him out of the conversation.
Sure.
Drake London, not a huge fan because I don't trust the Falcons passing game just yet. Terry McLaurin and DJ Moore, might rather them over Keenan Allen. Full point PPR, I get the argument, but those guys, I kind of I'd be more excited to draft them. Where I ended up settling on, Pat, is I'm going to stand by that I think Herbert has a resurgence and has one of the best years of his career. But to me, that is going to make me take more stabs at Quentin Johnston, because I think he's going to have a solid role, especially if one of those guys goes down and he's just a cheap way to get in on that offense. Maybe he becomes Herbert's favorite weapon. That's his ceiling, so who knows? And then also makes me want to take more stock in a less sexy but really, really interesting. Gerald Everett. That's a guy.
I love Gerald Everett.
You assume that this offense is going to say it's twice as good or 1.5 times as good. Gerald Everett, if he stays healthy, will hold down your tight end spot because I think Herbert's going to be good enough to support it.
And we've seen it now with Everett. He was good last year. He was really good at the end of 2021 when he was with Seattle, and obviously he had some good moments in Los Angeles, St. Louis. I don't remember the timeline with the Rams. But you touched on Quentin Johnston too, just for a second. If injuries don't exist, like if all these guys, I'm not crazy about him. Like I'd rather have Jackson Smith-Njigba. I'd rather have Jordan Addison. I'd rather have Zay Flowers. But again, we're looking at 2 other guys who have a severe, significant injury history. So like you said, Mike Williams sprains his ankle or Keenan Allen cracks a rib or whatever the hell always happens to him. We're looking at Quentin Johnston as the number 2 target on a team with a quarterback who, we both believe is going to break out. So and again, when you're drafting that low, that's a really fair dart to take. But yeah, we'll talk about some other tight ends here, but Everett is going outside of the tight end 1. He's probably one of my favorite guys that's not currently being drafted as a tight end 1. Just because of the targets, just because of he's a really he's a quick guy. He wears number 7, so it's deceiving. Like you'll see the ball go to number 7. You're like, who the hell is that? And you're like, oh, it's Gerald Everett. But yeah, he, especially in PPR leagues, he's a really sturdy guy who's gonna get you around 10 points every week, and at some points that's all you can ask for.
Yeah, Chargers offense is on the way up, and Gerald Everett probably the most low-key beneficiary of those that improvement. So I would go after him in a lot of leagues if you're waiting on tight end. I think he's around, what is it, tight end? Oh, he's tight end 18. Wow,
that's nuts.
He is a super value right now. That's nuts. I would have expected him to be near like 12 or 13 at worst. And we've also seen how well Kellen Moore has worked with Dalton Schultz and made him a factor in Dallas. So look, definitely excited for Everett. A lot of decent dart throws to take here in that Chargers offense that I think will be solid this year. Pat, your Las Vegas Raiders. I'll give you the floor, Pat. How do you feel about there's the Davante Adams jersey? So Jimmy G's the quarterback. I'm guessing we're not touching Jimmy G in fantasy, right? Please tell me. Okay, we're not touching Jimmy G in fantasy.
He had a couple of good, he was a guy that like you might slot him in during bye weeks, but that was a whole product of San Francisco. Like
Jimmy G with no Shanahan is no thank you. So we can just leave him in the past.
Unfortunately, that's my sentiment for basically this whole offense except one guy. I am significantly fading. And the only guy I'm not fading is Josh Jacobs. Like I talked about earlier, how there are a lot of guys that I don't like at the end of the first round for wide receivers. And at the end of the first round, I fucking hate Davante Adams. I would not touch him in that range. I would be more than happy to let someone else touch him. Here we go again with the touching.
At least it's not you this time.
Yeah. Here's the thing is that say what you will about Derek Carr and how good of a quarterback he is, but Derek Carr loves to throw the deep ball. Mm-hmm. And Davante Adams is great with catching the deep ball. And Jimmy G, I think you probably physically cannot throw the ball more than 15, 20 yards down the field. And so that just kills Adams' ceiling for a guy going, all those other guys in that range, like you look at guys behind him, Jalen Waddle, Devontae Smith, I would much rather have guys like that because they have, I think Garoppolo caps his ceiling so much. The floor is still there. The floor is absolutely 100%. There because he's gonna get a lot of these Jimmy G, kind of short yardage situations. But just like going that high, especially with some of the other guys maybe going behind him, a lot of running backs or like Travis Kelce, I cannot take Davante Adams that early.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. Also, real quick, we did skip over the Chargers backfield, but I think that's just because we know Austin Eckler is where he belongs.
He's
as
good.
RB2 overall, PPR, he is good. Draft him. He is what we think he is. They didn't add anybody in that backfield. Josh Kelly stinks. Isaiah Spiller might be good eventually. I don't know, but it's Austin Eckler. Draft him. He will be a beneficiary of that offense too. Pat, I'm right there with you. I didn't want to chastise you too bad because I know this is your team, but yeah, I'm so out on the Raiders, man. I think this might be one of the worst teams in football this year, even though talent-wise they are a little above the other teams we expect to be in the bottom of the barrel. But Davante Adams himself having reservations about where this offense is going, him saying so, like The best case scenario for Davante Adams in fantasy is him getting traded, which has been, rumored a little bit. There's a little bit of smoke, but the contract makes it difficult. The rumblings have been there, though, and that's the best case for him. And you can't draft a guy knowing that that's his best case scenario, at least not with that high of a pick.
I'll tell you, if he gets traded, that fucking sucks because, like, I bought 3 Raiders jerseys within the last, year.
Yeah.
Last year and a half. The others were Derek Carr and Darren Waller. So, like, come on. Like, I've probably thrown, like, over $400 into those jerseys, and now they're all just going to be obsolete. So, like, fuck that. But, I mean, I do really like Josh Jacobs. Assuming, again, he's also, he's in a similar situation to Saquon. Hasn't been a lot of rumblings about him holding out. He obviously wasn't at, non-mandatory workouts. We'll see what happens when training camp starts. But this was a guy last year who was just unbelievable, and everyone wrote him off under Josh McDaniels. People were talking about guys like Zamir White and the corpse of Brandon Bolden, and people just thought that Josh McDaniels, that Josh Jacobs was not one of his guys, and he was not going to lean on him. But holy shit, did he lean on him? And the other thing about Jacobs that I find interesting in 2021, he was a sneaky good receiving back. Under John Gruden, they peppered him with the ball, and everyone was saying last year, there's no way he maintains that receiving work. So in 2021, he caught 54 passes on 64 targets for 348 yards. That was with John Gruden and Uncle Rich. In 2022, he caught 53 balls on 64 targets for 400 yards. So he still held up. You don't think of him as a strong PPR running back, but he just is. He doesn't get the touchdowns, but who cares?
No, it doesn't matter.
With Jimmy G, that's going to benefit him the most. So I really like Josh. And what is he, RB9 or something? This was the
RB9, yes.
RB2. This was the RB2 last year. I love Josh Jacobs at RB9. If I'm sitting there staring at Josh Jacobs and Davante Adams, and I got to pick one of them, I'm picking Josh Jacobs in a heartbeat.
Absolutely. I think Jacobs is an interesting case with the guys that are ranked behind him. I think I would prefer him at this point over Ramondre Stevenson. I don't know that I would prefer him over Breece Hall, assuming that the Jets' backfield stays the way it is, just because I think the Jets' offense will be more efficient, provide more scoring opportunities for Jacobs. Sure. But if we're talking strictly, dominating the backfield, and it doesn't matter that much how good the offense is, and a guy who's still in his prime, Jacobs is absolutely a solid target. Pat, the receivers on this team beyond Davante Adams, I think we're also in agreement. Just no thanks because of Jimmy G. Jacoby Myers is that wide receiver 54. Hunter Renfrow, who you want to talk about trade rumors, wide receiver 79.
That's the thing.
Just good.
When they got Jacoby Myers, I remember texting my dad right after. My dad's also a Raiders fan. I texted him saying, "Oh, Renfro's gone," and then the next day they traded Darren Waller, and it was just never mind.
They're gonna bulk up Renfrow and put him at tight end.
Because you've seen, Jesus Christ, they got to be feeding that guy for days. But the big thing is that Jacoby, as a Patriots fan, this Jacoby Myers flourishes in the slot, and Hunter Renfrow is exclusively a slot receiver basically. Yeah. So Josh McDaniels must like him on the outside. Myers on the outside, I just don't know. I'm sure there'll be more. Those are more real life football guys that are going to help that team rather than fantasy. I don't know unless they get rid of Renfrow. If they get rid of Renfrow, then I think Jacoby Myers' stock goes up a decent amount to the point where he's probably on the radar. But as it is, they're just too similar for me right now. And again, an offense that's not going to be terrific. I just don't think there's enough love to go around.
Yeah, it's hard to get excited about anything in this offense that's not Jacobs and Davante Adams. And then again, even like you said, Adams is a little bit too rich for our blood right now with his ADP. Pat, Michael Mayer, though, interesting. I mean, how are you feeling about Michael Mayer now? We've had some weeks to digest it since he's been drafted. Any fantasy interest here?
No, not really. We're talking rookies. I prefer Dalton Kincaid. I prefer Sam Laporta. I just don't think that. I think it's just more so an offense. They didn't use. They didn't use tight ends a ton. Obviously, Waller's numbers declined over the last few years. Foster Moreau had his moments, but I just don't see tight end being the focal point of this offense. And again, in a position where tight end is just not good, I just still really don't see him. I still really don't see him being too much of a factor.
Rookie tight ends in general are such a bad bet. I mean, we try to get excited about them every year because we see rookie tight ends go to a team where it's okay, they're going to be the clear starter, or at least they have way more upside than the incumbent starter, and they'll take it. And over and over and over again, it's proven that it takes more than a year for a rookie tight end to end up emerging. And if any rookie tight ends are going to emerge this year, it's going to be Kincaid. It's going to be Laporta. It's not going to be Michael Mayer. I mean, it's just the offense does not allow for it. I don't see him.
In as much as we've clowned on Austin Hooper, like, again, he's been a somewhat reliable guy.
As a pulse.
In Atlanta, Cleveland, Tennessee, he's always been, somewhat of a guy that, they brought him in knowing, like, worst case scenario, Austin Hooper's our guy. So, like, Mayer, I'm just not in on it.
Just meh. All right, Pat. Broncos country.
Let's ride.
Let's ride. How do we feel about these Denver Broncos this year? Obviously, they're bringing in Sean Payton. They've kind of cleaned house in terms of the coaching staff. Russell Wilson at QB 18. Russell Wilson's a guy who I'm optimistic can put it together, again, like you said, in a real football capacity. Not a guy who I think is going to be on fantasy radars, even if he does get back a little bit to form. It'll just be maybe he becomes a bye week fill-in at that point, but it's just not a guy. There's too many other solid quarterbacks out there for me to be like, let me go. Again, Wilson would be a guy you draft with another quarterback.
Yeah,
there's just too many other more exciting guys for me to spend one of my 2 quarterback spots on him.
Yeah, it hurts him because he does not have much value with his legs anymore.
Yeah.
But I think he's a guy at QB 18. I think that's pretty good value. Like, if you're taking a quarterback, if you're kind of just throwing darts on quarterbacks and taking 2 or God forbid 3 guys in your draft, I mean, I think Russ is a guy who has a pretty good ceiling, but it all depends on what you think is going to happen with Sean Payton. Some people think that he's going to turn Russell Wilson back into Russell Wilson or Drew Brees, for God's sake. Mm-hmm. And some people just think they're still going to stink. I tend to fall in the middle there. I think they'll certainly be better, but my expectations are still a bit tampered. But yeah, Russ is not a guy that I would be drafting realistically to start. More so kind of just a guy to stash on the bench and cross your fingers. But I'm also a guy that does not draft 2 quarterbacks in a 1 QB league. So
no, and if you are probably the latter drafted one is going to be an upside type of play, like a Bryce Young or something to that effect. It's not going to be a guy who you're just desperately hoping gets back to any shred of what he once was. So I'm pretty much out on Russell Wilson. Speaking of out, Pat, I may be more out on Javonte Williams. Yeah. Look, RB29 is not a bad spot for him. I understand it. This is a guy who was looked at as a possible RB1 last year. He was my RB1 last year. I took him in the 2nd round, hoping for the best. Ended up, tearing up his knee. Now at RB29, I mean, the guys he's above, there's a couple that I'm like, no, I would definitely take them ahead of you, but like, it's tough. I like the talent. I like the involvement he'll probably have when he's back. I just do not think that so close to the injury, he's going to have the efficiency necessary. It's going to be like J.K. Dobbins from last year.
Yeah, and especially like we talked about too. Like, he had a nasty tear. Like, he tore everything in that knee as opposed to Bryce Hall, who kind of just had a clean ACL tear. So, yeah, I'm under the belief that, he's not going to be ready to start the year. And 2, like, I'm not putting that kind of onus on the fact that he's going to come back and look like he's looked in the past couple of years. Yeah. I am, unless there's a really long fall, and I guess again, like if it's kind of reported like, hey, he is going to miss the start of the year, he will fall considerably. And if he's at a point where he's on your bench, you have an IR spot, sure, of course,
you have an IR spot, absolutely. We're so used to not having one that it's like we don't even think about these guys.
Was that one of our rule? No, it wasn't. God damn it.
We still got time. We can bully him into it, maybe. Yeah. Our commissioner,
Andy, if you're listening.
Andy.
But yeah, just doxed him. But one of the hottest guys, watching all this fantasy stuff, reading all this stuff, one of the hottest guys this offseason has been Samaje Perine. And honestly, I'm a believer. This was a guy who in Cincinnati looked really good in his opportunities, especially last year. Like, he helped me win a league last year where he had those 2 weeks starting for Mixon. He was great. And even when Mixon was out there, this was a guy who was a great pass catcher. And we've seen, even with or without Williams, Sean Payton loves 2 running backs. Whether it be, Mark Ingram in recent years or like Tim Hightower, for fuck's sake. That was a long time ago. But, with Alvin Kamara and stuff and it's made it work like that year where Kamara and Ingram were both RB1s. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but I think even with Williams, I think Samaje Perine is a very viable guy with, his, with Peyton's 2 running back usage, his pass catching. I'm in on him, just like everyone else.
Peyton is good enough at creating this 2 running back system that I am willing to invest in the guy that's healthy. I'll put it that way. So Samaje Perine, I am also in on. I just think Javonte Williams, there's so many factors working against him, and regardless of the ADP that you may think there's some value to be returned there, you've got the injury recovery. Now he has a guy who likes a 2-back system and an offense that, as much as I do believe Peyton will revive it to an extent, an offense that might be ass. It might be. So then you've got an injured running back in a timeshare on a bad team. I just don't want any part of it. I'd rather take stabs at, let's look at the guys ranked either behind Javonte or well behind him. Zach Charbonnet, rather have him. Brian Robinson, rather have him. Rashad Penny, Devon Achane. Like, all these guys, Jerick McKinnon, who we talked about, Kendry Miller even, because you've got both him and Kamara behind him. Somebody's going to be the running back in New Orleans. Yeah. I don't think it's worth the headache. Like, he's not going to be a guy that the upside warrants it. Like, yes, you can draft him at RB 29, and maybe from week 10 through 17, he becomes RB 18 or 19 over that stretch. But the ceiling is not much higher than that, I don't think.
Yeah, no.
So you can wait on it, but good luck with that. Pat, the receivers here, guys who are also going to be looking to recover from just the dumpster fire that was Russell Wilson last year. Jerry Jeudy ended up being okay. I mean, the only guy to put up a semi-respectable stat line last year, I believe it was like 964 yards and 6 touchdowns, which when you watch that team, you would be shocked to know that he was able to rack up that many counting statistics.
And if you remember last week, I teased that my favorite receiver going into
this
year.
Is it Jerry Jeudy?
It is Jerry Jeudy.
Okay.
With the way that he clicked, even, like with Russ being as bad as he was, Jeudy had a couple of huge games at the end of the year once he was healthy. And again, while I don't think this is going to be New Orleans 2.0, I think they are going to improve a noticeable amount. And I think Jerry Jeudy is just probably better than Cortland Sutton at this point. Jeudy was a guy who was really highly rated coming out of the draft. Somehow got drafted after inmate Ruggs and CeeDee Lamb. But, Judy's a guy who's still got really high upside, and I think he's going to be Russ's favorite target this year.
I think there's a strong possibility of that. Cortland Sutton, a guy who we both had high expectations for last year, but you look and both he and Jeudy were around 100 targets. Jeudy made way more of those mostly bad targets last year, made them into somewhat respectable numbers. So Sutton, a guy I wouldn't be shocked to see traded, honestly, before the season or even during the season. I expect Jeudy to be the kind of the focal point of this offense. You got Marvin Mims, Pat. He's just kind of a dart throw guy. No one I'm really thinking of too much about. I don't really have to talk about him. Greg Dulcich, I think, is interesting. At tight end 14, Sean Payton said he's going to use him in the Joker role, which doesn't mean he's going to be in the backfield or anything like that, but it's just he's going to try and move him around the formation and try to create some mismatches. I mean, Sean Payton's been very good with tight ends, obviously spearheaded the Jimmy Graham peak. So I like Greg Dulcich, and I think there's a chance that he is the number 2 target in this offense. So as tight end 14, I don't mind that investment if you want to take him, compared to a guy like Kincaid or something to that effect.
I like Greg Dulcich a lot as well. Similar to Everett. You look at Dulcich's numbers last year. He was a guy that was getting 4 to 6 catches a game. And, again, tight end PPR, that's a solid floor there. And he's got the upside. Like, this is one of those guys now, this new wave of tight ends, where some of these guys are just basically big receivers. These are guys that aren't going to really help you in blocking situations, which is tough because, they may not be on the field as much. But if you're looking just from a fantasy perspective, a guy like Dulcich, like you said, could end up being the number 2 target in an offense that we think could be passable. So, and again, as a guy that's going outside of tight end 1. Like, if you're sitting there and thinking about drafting Dalton Kincaid, I would urge you to draft Greg Dulcich instead.
Yeah, I think that's fair. That little tier of tight ends, 11 through 14 is Dalton Kincaid, Chigakonkwo, Dalton Schultz, and Greg Dulcich. One of those guys is going to finish top 5. That's my call. I don't know who, but I feel like one of those guys is going to be top 5.
But I really like the other 3. And we know how much I like Okonkwo, too.
Absolutely. And Dulcich, look, one of the avenues statistically and historically to being a top 5 tight end in fantasy is you have to be a top 2 target on your own team. That's very much a possibility for Greg Dulcich. As much as we like Gerald Everett, Pat, if everybody's healthy, that's not a possibility for him. So if you're really looking at, that side of things, Greg Dulcich could very well be your guy. That'll do it for our fantasy preview here, Pat. I want to jump into this little draft here. I don't want to put it off again, but I think we've just been talking more about fantasy stuff lately, huh?
Which is good.
Which is great.
I was
A lot of
telling
fantasy insight.
telling Bran during the week that like we do our draft every year Labor Day weekend, and I've made a rule for myself in the past where like August 1st, like I'm not allowed to like actually look at rankings, read stuff, watch videos until August 1st. But god damn it was like June 3rd, and I'm sitting there watching YouTube videos and getting pissed because now that's just gonna monopolize my head all summer. But it's great because it's gonna be a lot of fun to talk about it. So you know what, it is what it is. I'll take it.
You'll be prepared. Maybe you'll actually win a championship for once.
Yeah,
This is what winners do.
Yeah.
But, all right, this draft, Pat, the best sporting events in history. I just wanted to kind of talk about this with the NBA Finals, coming to a head, to see who can put together the best list of sporting events that are just iconic in America, worldwide, whatever it is. Pat, I'll be honest, I have no idea who has the first pick for this. Is it you? Is it me? I
think it's me. I think you had the first in the Steven.
Okay.
I think you had the
right.
first pick in the Stephen A draft that may or may not have actually existed. You guys will never know. Real ones will know.
Never know.
Where's
the real ones will know. The 4 people that stuck here and just listened to that garbage disposal for an hour. But
God,
yes, you have the first pick, and you can
masochist.
You can make it whenever.
I
you
mean,
wish.
I think this is a lot of these drafts. It's been like a debate, but I think there is a correct answer here, and I think it's the Super Bowl.
Okay, Super Bowl. I think you will actually get a lot of people angry with you for saying that that's just the obvious correct pick. I think there are a lot of World Cup truthers out there, Pat. I think there's a lot of World Cup truthers.
Oh,
out
sure.
there. For most iconic,
but
that's not what I would want to pick, and it's not, quite frankly, what I'm going to pick here with my second pick. But I think in terms of iconic, that one is probably. You'd get some angry people in your mentions if you.
I'm not a worldwide man. Like that was, it's basically a holiday, and everybody watches the Super Bowl. People that don't give a shit about football go to a Super Bowl party. It's just a time for people to get together and have a good time. Like, it's just there's a whole week of build up. Like it's just in terms of American sports. Yeah, like sorry soccer fans, but like it is the pinnacle.
To the point where we want it to be an actual holiday in America, where we've been
there have been talks.
We've been begging for that following Monday off for so long, and we just have not gotten it. But maybe eventually, because that is honestly the biggest thing in this country. Pat, a solid pick. Again, I am not going to go to the World Cup here. I'm going to go to what I think is just maybe the most fun one to watch in a little longer term. I'm going to take March Madness with my first pick of best sporting events. I mean, the first 2 weekends, I guess really the first 4 days for the first 2 rounds of it are just game after game after game. They are so much fun. At March Madness, there's really nothing else like it.
I just remember like a handful of years ago when I was in college, like I'd have a Thursday class that ended at noon, and I didn't have class Friday, and I would just drive home like a fucking dart without feathers to just sit there for the next 4 days and just watch nothing but college basketball.
I mean,
it is.
My mom would get me out of school early. Like if I asked for it, she did that a couple times. She'd let me go home and watch the games that started at noon on a Thursday. Just some incredible memories with March Madness. Filling out a bracket, there's nothing more fun.
Oh, yeah.
I
remember one year I was like sick as a dog. I was probably like 14 years old, and everyone's like, "Oh, you just stayed home to watch basketball." It's like, shit, I fucking wish I did, but I got to. Like,
you're like, it's a nice coincidence at the very least. All right, first 2 picks, Super Bowl, March Madness, probably the most iconic American sporting events in terms of just the hype leading up to it. Pat, what are you going with for your second pick?
I am going to go with the World Cup here for my for my second pick.
You may have won the draft because of this.
Similar to the NFL, similar to the Super Bowl. Like people that don't even like soccer, like I don't love soccer. It's just never been my thing to get super into. But I get invested in these things. And whether it's not Team USA, especially this past World Cup. With some of these storylines, some of these underdogs, some of the overdogs going down, like in just to see the passion, my father has some friends in Brazil, and like they would the country would basically just shut down when they played, like for 2 hours it just shut down, and everyone would just go and watch the Brazil game. Like it's amazing how it's probably in America just the fact that it's not as huge of a sport, but in some of these countries it's just a way of life, and it's so much fun.
Yeah, I agree. That's where I would have gone with my next pick, and I feel like you having kind of the most popular American event and most popular international event could be a tough hole for me to climb out of, but I'm going to try and do that with what is also sort of an international event. I'm just going to take the Olympics. So many sports being showcased, just as if it weren't for the fact that it just destroys the economy every single time it happens of the place that it happens in, it would be one of the most beloved events, and it still kind of is even despite that. So just all the different types of athletes from all over the world that can show their skills, I got to go with the Olympics.
Again, I've never been a huge Olympics guy. Like, I just never really.
Me neither. I just know
like,
how
like
iconic
basketball.
it is. Yeah.
Like, honestly, it's helped the fact that, like, baseball and then golf have sort of gotten incorporated, kind of maybe a little more interesting, but it's never been something that I've really kind of just, like, sat down and got into for a summer or a winter. But, again, you're covering a lot of ground there, so. All right, let's go back to America. I've got the World Cup. I might as well add the World Series in there.
Okay. World Series. We are taking baseball, a sport that is, relatively international. I mean, definitely people overseas care about it way more than they care about the Super Bowl. So World Series, totally fair. The only beef with that being that people say it's not a World Series because it's just happening in America and / Canada. But deal with it. There's players, players from all over the world. So it doesn't matter.
But the atmosphere is second to none in a lot of these games. Like every pitch matters for anywhere between 4 to 7 games. I remember the World Series that always resonates with me was that the Cubs Guardians, or whatever they were back then, with the Rajai Davis home run and then the weather
UConn
delay.
Avery Point legend Rajai Davis, baby.
Yeah, UConn Avery Point even. Yeah, like what a guy. But yeah, like things like that, those are the ones that like really resonate in my head. Unfortunately, Bran, as Yankee fans, our memories of stuff like that are faded. Are faded to the.
Man, I remember going into art class and talking with our boy Mitch and just being so excited that the Yankees won the World Series. Little did I know that
even
was
like
the
I was
last
saying,
one for a
the
while.
last few years I've just been like, I just want them to get there. Like I just want them to get there. But yeah, if for the fans of teams that do win the World Series, good for you. That's a hell of a feeling.
Yeah. All right. I got March Madness. I got Olympics. We've got some other major sports here in America that I feel like I need to take the finals for. Pat, I feel like it's more. I'm not. Okay. Full disclosure, I'm between the Stanley Cup finals and the NBA finals.
I figured.
Me personally, it's the NBA finals because I actually watch the NBA. But I will say the few times I have tuned into playoff hockey and all of the people that have told me about playoff hockey, they're like, it is lit. And I agree. With that said, I am going to go ahead and take the NBA finals.
Oh, really?
I am. It's just, I feel like, you've got NBA Twitter, you've got people all over the internet that are obsessed with, honestly, more yelling about basketball than actually watching it. But at the very least, that whole community is so active during the NBA finals and I feel like sometimes it's the only time all year that those sewer rats actually watch basketball. I think that makes the NBA finals special in its own way. And of course, I'm very much enjoying this one this year. And I'm about to go there. I can't not pick it.
That's fair. See, honestly, I was not going to. If you taking the Stanley Cup Finals, I was not going to take the NBA Finals. But since you flipped me, I will take the Stanley Cup Finals. Okay. Again, as a guy that's not really a huge hockey fan, again, it's just atmosphere. And hockey fans are very, very intense, very dedicated.
Yeah, very much so.
And it's just such a high-intensity thing. Like I said, I'd put it in terms of the big four American sports. I do put it behind the Super Bowl and the World Series, but I would put it ahead of the NBA Finals.
I think that's fair. Pat, I'm about to take the most exciting sporting event that happens every single year.
Damn it, just do it and break my heart.
The absolute best event in the history of American sports, the Pro Bowl. No, I'm not taking the Pro Bowl. Pat, I'm actually not going to take anything that you want here. I'm going to take something that you can throw a flag on if you want, but I think it would be a misguided flag. I'm taking WrestleMania.
Sure.
Whatever anybody says, it's a live event full of athleticism. There can be, pro wrestling haters out there. I'm sure there are a few of you, but the spectacle of it. If you haven't, there are people out there that don't like wrestling that have just, stumbled into a WrestleMania and they were like, that was fucking awesome. Like the theatrics of that particular event, as opposed to just a weekly Raw or SmackDown episode, is wild. They always pull out all the stops to make sure, that their match is memorable. WrestleMania is something I've been to many, many times and would probably choose, over some of these other ones. So I'm going to take that and mix it up a little
bit. That's fine. That's fair. Honestly, I wanted you to take what I thought you were going to take because I've got a dilemma now here. Obviously, my two favorite kind of outside sports are golf and motorsports. Obviously, the Daytona 500 fucking sucks. Like, no one cares. Like, that is not something. So right now I'm debating between the Masters and the Indy 500, which I believe to be the over things like, the F1 Monaco race at 24 Hours of Le Mans. Like, I think the Indy 500 is the one. But I'm gonna go with the Masters for my last pick. I just think like you see, it starts in like fucking November during these football things where CBS just starts playing these Masters and the music and Jim Nance, and it's just such a low key kind of vibe. Like there's nothing better than just sitting on the couch for 4 straight days, just relaxing and watching the Masters. In the history, I would be remiss to not put it on my board with the opportunity.
I think that's fair, Pat. I am not going to go to the motorsport round. I am also going to go the golf round. This was my wild card pick. This was the one I said last week where, we talked about how we were going to do this draft, and I was like, there might be one that you wouldn't expect.
What are you taking, the fucking Travelers Championship?
I am taking the Waste Management Phoenix Open.
Oh!
The most lit golf event out
the
there.
Complete polar opposite of the Masters.
Total opposite. At the Masters, if you sneeze wrong, you get kicked out. Waste Management Phoenix Open, they want you to throw shit. They want you to be a lunatic. I think it's just maybe the most unique American sporting event, and so I couldn't let it go undrafted.
Especially with how uppity golf is. As much as we all love golf, it's an uppity, like basically rich white people sport. That's what they wanted it to be many years ago. But that was not on my radar at all. But that's a fun one. Aside, did you see yesterday? I don't know if you saw what happened in the Canadian Open, but Nick Thomas won his first tournament. He is Canadian, first Canadian to win in 69 years. Nice. And so like some of his fellow Canadian golfers, kind of stormed the green, and this guy Adam Hadwin, he was kind of in a hoodie, so he just got fucking decked by security. Like you got to find that video, Bran, or you guys watching. You guys have to watch. There's some great shots of Adam Hadwin just getting fucking destroyed by
awesome.
But this guy made a 72-foot putt to win in a playoff. It was electric. People are saying it's one of the biggest moments in Canadian sports history. I don't know if we have any listeners from Canada right now. Feel free to chime in. But yeah, that's a hell of a video.
Any of our Canadian audience, feel free to message us and let us know how you felt about it. All right, just to recap the draft, Pat has the Super Bowl, the World Cup, World Series, Stanley Cup Finals, and the Masters. I have March Madness, the Olympics, the NBA Finals, WrestleMania, and the Waste Management Open. I think you probably won this one.
I was going to say, this is the one time,
we've
done a lot of these drafts where I've been like, you've got it, or I've been like, it's up for debate. But this is the one that I feel like I got this. I think this is the one that I could firmly put the feather in my cap on this one.
Yeah. All right, as always, we're going to end this with our viewer questions. Pat, which non-first round rookie wide receiver excels the most this year? To be honest, Pat, I didn't really research this. Honestly, the only one I can think of right now is freaking Jonathan Mingo. So let me look up the NFL draft wide receivers real quick.
Oh, I read the question wrong.
What did you how'd you read it?
I more so thought it was I thought it was like a non-rookie wide receiver. I was about to sit here and talk about Treylon Burks. So let's work together here.
Work together to research. Okay, I've got mine because I was trying to think of who they were. I've got Josh Downs. I think Josh Downs is going to have sort of an immediate role on this Colts offense. I don't know. This is becoming more and more of a fantasy podcast, which is what I want it to be honest with you. I don't know how much fantasy value he's going to have, but I think he'll be a solid safety valve for Anthony Richardson and maybe a guy that does end up with some standalone fantasy value alongside Michael Pittman. Josh Downs being a third-round pick out of North Carolina, I feel good about him as a non-first-round receiver.
Yeah, Jonathan Mingo is a good one, but I'm gonna go in a different direction. I'm gonna stay in the AFC South though, and I'm gonna go Tank Dell from the from the Texans there, because this was a guy that once they drafted C.J. Stroud said, "I want Tank Dell. I want this guy on my team." And again, they've kind of muddied it up there. You've got Nico Collins, you've got Robert Woods, you've got Dalton Schultz. But at the end of the day, like, none of those guys are like, John Mechie as well. None of those guys are like slam dunks to kind of emerge as the lead target. So I think Tank Dell could worm his way in there, and maybe if not for this year, but maybe for more of a long-term thing. And a guy, former SWAC guy, started off at Alabama A&M, but he did get drafted out of Houston.
Okay.
Third-round pick.
Yes, that is correct.
Oh, he was
Houston
picked 69. I have to go with it.
Nice. Very nice. All right, and then with our final question, most underrated player at the running back position. So obviously a lot of ways you can go here. Pat, going up and down these depth charts right now, I come back to a guy we spent a lot of time talking about a little while ago, Jerick McKinnon. I'm going to take Jerick McKinnon. I mean, he's a guy so productive, fits that Chiefs offense so well, and a guy who people are so eager to just push aside and push down the depth chart for Isaiah Pacheco. He's not going anywhere, folks. I hate to break it to you. He is a very, very good player.
Yeah. See, I'm going to go a little bigger here because, again, this is a guy who's probably – well, he is being drafted as an RB1. We'll probably talk about him next week. I'm going to go Tony Pollard here. Like, I think that this guy is truly an elite running back. We finally got to see it last year that he was just being held back by an aging, slow Ezekiel Elliott. We saw what he could do as a dual threat guy with very little competition in that backfield this year. I think he is really going to excel. I think he's going to show that he is truly elite.
Yeah, he's a guy that, I've done a few tentative mock drafts here, and he's a guy that I just every time I get him in the second round, I feel like I'm stealing.
Oh my God.
I feel like I'm robbing someone. Like I've already snatched up, be it Saquon or a receiver or something in the first, and I get to come around, I get Tony Pollard. I feel rich.
In a league I was in, I traded Amon-Ra St. Brown. In the package I got back had Tony Pollard in it, and I got fucking skewered, like destroyed. My team was in last place, but I'm like, I just like these guys. And then every week I'd be like, hey guys, just want to check in on Tony Pollard again. Just want to circle
Tony
back.
How's Tony
I did end up
doing,
coming
guys?
in last in the league anyway, but the guy that I made the trade with did not win, so they
that
got no
matters then.
dirt on me. But yeah,
It
it was just even more beautiful to watch him go off, knowing that I was going to be a further thorn in these people's sides.
Absolutely. All right, folks, that's going to do it for this week's Off the Bench. Next week, we'll be talking about, if anything happens with Hopkins or Cook, we'll obviously be all on top of it. Fantasy-wise, we are moving on to the NFC next week, Pat. I don't know what division. I'll make a decision, but you guys will have to tune in and figure out which NFC division we are going to talk about first. We'll go through all of them over the course of the next 4 episodes. And, hey, we'll see how the Nuggets fare as well, because I don't know. Maybe I don't know if I will have had my little soliloquy at the beginning of this podcast. I'm hoping they finish it off, but we will see. Guys, for Pat Gustafson, I am Brandon Carney, and we will see you guys next week.
Bye-bye.